Once considered relics of another age, aircraft born in the final decades of the Soviet Union are quietly returning to the center of Russia's aviation future, not as museum pieces, not as nostalgic curiosities, but as tools of survival in a world where access to Western technology can vanish overnight. In recent years, Russia's skies have become a proving ground for an unexpected idea. When the newest jets are no longer available, the past may hold the only viable path forward. Nowhere is this more visible than in the resurrection and modernization of old Tupolev airliners, particularly the Tu-214, an aircraft once overshadowed by Boeing and Airbus, now being reshaped into a cornerstone of Russia's post-sanctions aviation strategy. For decades, Russian airlines followed the same logic as the rest of the global industry. Efficiency mattered, fuel burn mattered, passenger comfort mattered. Western aircraft delivered all of it at scale. Fleets filled with Airbus A320 family jets, 330 wide-bodies, Boeing 737 next-generation aircraft, and later the 737 MAX and 787 Dreamliner became the backbone of Russia's commercial aviation. These aircraft were reliable, globally supported, and integrated into an international ecosystem of spare parts, maintenance centers, software updates, and regulatory cooperation. For a time, it seemed inevitable that Russia's own civil aircraft industry would fade into a supporting role, producing niche types while importing the core of its fleet from abroad. That assumption collapsed in the spring of 2022. Sanctions did not merely block new aircraft deliveries, but severed access to the invisible infrastructure that keeps modern airplanes flying. Spare parts stopped flowing, software updates became inaccessible, maintenance documentation became legally unusable, engines built by companies like General Electric, Pratt & Whitney, CFM International, and Rolls-Royce could no longer be serviced under manufacturer approval. Suddenly, aircraft that had been perfectly airworthy on paper became ticking clocks, with every flight hour consuming resources that could not easily be replaced. Russian airlines were forced into improvisation. Aircraft were grounded to be cannibalized for parts. Maintenance schedules were stretched. Gray market supply chains emerged. But these were temporary solutions, not a sustainable strategy. The uncomfortable truth became unavoidable. Without a domestically controlled fleet, Russian commercial aviation faced long-term decline. That realization triggered a pivot that had been discussed quietly for years but never fully embraced. Instead of waiting for future programs to mature, Russia would turn back to aircraft designs it already understood, aircraft it could build, maintain, and legally support without foreign permission. This was not about competing head-to-head with the Airbus A350 or Boeing 777, but about preserving connectivity across the largest country on Earth. The Tu-214 sits at the center of this pivot, tracing its roots to the Tu-204 program of the late Soviet period, an ambitious attempt to create a modern narrow-body jet capable of rivaling Western designs. The aircraft was technologically respectable when it first flew, featuring digital avionics, fly-by-wire elements, and high-bypass turbofan engines. But timing was cruel. The collapse of the Soviet Union shattered funding, fractured supply chains, and left the aircraft stranded between eras. By the time Russia's economy stabilized, Airbus and Boeing had already entrenched themselves globally, and airlines preferred proven Western platforms with massive support networks. As a result, only a limited number of Tu-214 aircraft were built, primarily for government transport, special missions, and a handful of commercial operators. The jet gained a reputation for robustness and long range, but also for higher fuel consumption compared to newer Western narrow-bodies. In a market obsessed with efficiency, that was enough to sideline it. What changed was not the aircraft, but the world around it. In a sanctions environment, fuel efficiency becomes secondary to availability. An aircraft that burns more fuel but can be legally maintained suddenly becomes more valuable than a hyper-efficient jet grounded for lack of parts. The Tu-214, built largely with Russian components and supported by Russian factories, re-emerged as a practical solution rather than a compromised one. Recent developments have accelerated this transformation dramatically. Russian authorities have significantly ramped up Tu-214 production, with the United Aircraft Corporation now aiming to deliver dozens of these aircraft annually to meet urgent domestic demand. Major Russian carriers, facing the reality of their aging Western fleets, have placed substantial orders for the type. The urgency has intensified as airlines confront the imminent prospect of grounding large portions of their Boeing and Airbus fleets due to part shortages and maintenance issues, with some estimates suggesting hundreds of Western-built aircraft could be forced out of service within the next few years if alternative solutions aren't found. The Russian government has thrown its full weight behind the program, treating Tu-214 production as a matter of national security rather than merely commercial interest. State-owned United Aircraft Corporation has been tasked with scaling up manufacturing capacity at facilities that had been operating at minimal levels for years. Reports indicate that production has increased from just a handful of aircraft per year to plans for several dozen annually, though achieving these targets has proven challenging given supply chain complexities and the need to restart dormant production lines. The government has also committed substantial financing to support airlines purchasing these aircraft, recognizing that without such intervention, carriers might struggle to afford the transition. Modernizing the Tu-214 is not a matter of pulling old airframes out of storage and painting them anew, but a deep industrial effort touching every system on the aircraft. Older avionics are replaced with domestically produced digital flight management systems. Navigation systems are updated to integrate modern satellite positioning, particularly Russia's GLONASS system. Cockpits are revised to meet contemporary operational standards while remaining compatible with Russian certification rules. Wiring looms are replaced. Hydraulic systems are inspected, overhauled, or redesigned. Structural elements are examined for fatigue and reinforced where necessary. Engines play a central role in this revival. The Tu-214 is powered by the avionics PS90 series engine, a high-bypass turbofan developed in Russia. While it cannot match the fuel efficiency of the latest CFM LEAP or Pratt & Whitney geared turbofan engines used on the Airbus A320neo, it offers something far more valuable in the current context: total domestic control. Russia can produce it, overhaul it, and support it without external approval. That autonomy alone reshapes the aircraft's value proposition. Recent reports suggest that efforts are underway to further improve the PS90A's efficiency and reliability, though these modifications are incremental rather than revolutionary. From an operational standpoint, the modernized Tu-214 fills a critical niche, with seating capacity typically configured for around 200 passengers and a range sufficient to connect Moscow to most of Russia's territory and beyond. It can replace many missions previously flown by the Boeing 737 or Airbus A320 family. It is particularly well suited for long domestic routes across Siberia and the Far East, where alternate airports are sparse and reliability matters more than marginal fuel savings. Major Russian airlines have begun incorporating the type into their fleets, with some carriers planning to operate dozens of these aircraft by the end of the decade. Cabin modernization is another key element. While early Tu-214 interiors reflected Soviet utilitarianism, the upgraded versions feature contemporary seating, improved sound insulation, modern lighting, and updated environmental control systems. Passenger experience will not rival the latest Airbus A320neo with its expansive overhead bins and ultra-quiet cabin, but it will be fully competitive with older Western narrowbodies that still dominate many fleets worldwide. Airlines are working to ensure that passengers perceive minimal difference between flying on Western aircraft and the Russian alternatives, recognizing that customer acceptance is crucial to the program's success. Perhaps the most underestimated aspect of this revival is workforce continuity. Russia never lost the institutional knowledge required to build and maintain Tupolev aircraft. Engineers, technicians, and pilots trained on these platforms still exist within the system. Reviving the Tu-214 leverages that experience instead of discarding it. Training pipelines can be reactivated faster than entirely new programs can be built from scratch. Pilot transition training from Western types to the Tu-214 has been streamlined, with experienced instructors able to draw on decades of operational knowledge. The Tu-214 does not stand alone. Its return is part of a broader strategy that includes extending the service life of wide-body aircraft like the Ilyushin 96 and exploring various options for maintaining connectivity on international routes where Russian aircraft face certification challenges. In a sanctions environment, every airframe becomes a strategic asset. Where Western airlines retire aircraft at the first sign of inefficiency, Russia is extracting every possible year of service from what it already owns. The practical reality facing Russian aviation is stark. Without domestic production, the country risks seeing its commercial fleet shrink dramatically over the coming years as Western aircraft become increasingly difficult to maintain. Critics often frame this approach as backward-looking, but that interpretation misses the point. This is not about nostalgia, but about resilience. Western aviation philosophy prioritizes efficiency within a globalized system. Russian aviation, under pressure, is prioritizing independence within a constrained one. These are different optimization problems with different solutions. The sanctions environment has forced a fundamental recalculation of what constitutes value in an aircraft, shifting the equation from operating cost per seat mile toward availability, maintainability, and strategic autonomy. The Tu-214 also serves another purpose that goes beyond passenger transport. Its airframe is adaptable, with variants configured for cargo, government transport, surveillance, communications relay, and airborne command roles. That flexibility makes it attractive not just to airlines, but to state operators. In an era where dual-use platforms are increasingly valuable, the aircraft becomes more than a commercial product, but infrastructure itself. Recent orders have included specialized variants for government ministries and security services, underscoring the aircraft's versatility. Production plans reflect cautious ambition tempered by industrial reality. Rather than attempting an unrealistic surge, Russia is scaling output gradually, allowing factories to stabilize supply chains and quality control. Initial production numbers have been modest, but the long-term goal is steady replacement rather than rapid expansion. This mirrors a broader industrial trend within Russia, favoring sustainability over spectacle. Manufacturing facilities are being upgraded, workforce training is being expanded, and supplier networks are being rebuilt after years of atrophy. The challenge is not merely assembling aircraft, but reconstituting an entire industrial ecosystem that had largely shifted to other priorities during the decades when Western aircraft dominated Russian skies. Current reports indicate that Russian airlines are now operating growing numbers of Tu-214 aircraft, with deliveries accelerating into 2026. The pace of expansion has varied, constrained by production bottlenecks and the complexity of restarting large-scale manufacturing after years of minimal output. Nevertheless, the trajectory is clear. The Tu-214 is transitioning from a niche aircraft to a mainstream component of Russia's domestic fleet. Some major carriers have announced plans to operate significant numbers of the type within the next few years, treating it not as a stopgap, but as a long-term fleet anchor. Of course, challenges remain. Fuel consumption is higher than modern Western jets. Noise levels, while compliant with domestic regulations, are less competitive internationally. export potential is limited by certification constraints and the geopolitical environment. But these limitations matter less in a domestic context where alternatives are scarce. The aircraft's economics, once a fatal flaw in a competitive global market, become acceptable when the alternative is grounded fleets and severed connections across the world's largest country. The deeper story here is not about whether the Tu-214 can outperform an Airbus A320neo, because it cannot. The real question is whether Russia can maintain a functioning aviation system without access to Western manufacturers. On that metric, the Tu-214 is not a compromise but a solution. It represents a fundamental shift in how Russia approaches aviation, from participant in a global market to operator of a largely self-contained system. This transformation carries costs, inefficiency, and technological sophistication, but delivers benefits in autonomy and resilience that, in the current environment, Russian authorities consider worth the trade-off. This strategy also buys time. While Tupolev aircraft return to service, newer programs like the MC-21 continue development, albeit facing their own challenges related to sanctions on composite materials and propulsion systems. The MC-21, intended to directly compete with the Airbus A320neo and Boeing 737 MAX, represents Russia's long-term vision. But complex aircraft programs take years, even decades, to mature fully. The Tu-214 bridges the gap between necessity and ambition, providing a workable solution while more advanced platforms slowly progress towards certification and production. The MC-21 program itself has faced delays as engineers work to replace imported components with domestic alternatives, a process that has proven more time-consuming and difficult than initially anticipated. In the global aviation community, this revival is watched with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Some see it as proof that sanctions accelerate technological regression, forcing Russia backward into less efficient designs. Others see it as evidence that industrial capability, once built, never fully disappears, and that sanctions may inadvertently strengthen domestic manufacturing rather than weakening it. Both interpretations contain truth. The reality is nuanced, reflecting neither complete success nor total failure, but rather adaptation under constraint. What cannot be denied is that the Tu-214's return marks a shift in priorities. For Russia, aviation is no longer just a commercial enterprise, but a matter of sovereignty. The ability to move people, goods, and authority across vast distances without foreign approval is not a luxury, but a strategic requirement. In a country spanning 11 time zones with vast territories accessible primarily by air, maintaining connectivity is essential to national cohesion and economic function. The Tu-214, for all its limitations, provides that connectivity in a way that sanctioned Western aircraft increasingly cannot. In the end, the skies do not care about politics. Aircraft either fly or they do not. As Tu-214 jets roll out of factories once thought dormant, one message becomes clear. In a fractured world, resilience often comes not from the newest technology, but from the technology you can still control. The aircraft's resurgence is a testament to the enduring value of domestic industrial capability and the lengths to which nations will go to preserve essential connectivity when external supply chains collapse. The Tu-214 is not the future of global aviation, but for Russia, it may be the difference between grounded fleets and continued flight. And sometimes, that is more than enough.